Here's one of Australia's old stories, one that doesn't get enough recognition, and two, a boy from a remote island who changed how the world understands air disaster, better known as the Black Box. Dr. David Warren. A man born in 1925 on an Aboriginal community called Groote Island, a remote island in the Gulf of Carpentaria off the coast of the Northern Territory. By air, it sits roughly 630 kilometres from Darwin, and from Darwin to Melbourne, it's roughly a further 3,000 kilometres by air, where his life and work would later take shape. But for Warren, distance was never just geography. It was separation from the centres of science, industry, and decision-making in Australia. And yet, that is where the story begins. David Warren was the son of missionary parents. In 1934, when he was just 9 years old, his father, Reverend Herbert Warren, was killed in an air crash over Bass Strait. There were no recordings, no flight data, no cockpit voice, no answers, just silence. And that silence would follow him into adulthood, quietly shaping the question he would spend his entire life trying to solve. How do we understand what happened when the aircraft itself goes silent? Warren later moved from the remote Northern Territory life to mainland Australia, eventually making his way to Melbourne. By the early 1950s, at the age around 25 to 30, he was working at the Aeronautical Research Laboratories at a time when aviation was expanding rapidly, but crash investigation was still limited and often speculative. When aircrafts went down, investigators were left with wreckage and fragments of information, but very rarely the moment itself. No cockpit recording, no flight data, no final seconds preserved, just interpretation. In 1957, at the age of 32, Warren built something the world did not yet know it needed: the Flight Memory Unit. It recorded cockpit conversations and instrument data using magnetic wire technology, an early and fragile system, but one built on a powerful idea. If an aircraft crashes, the truth should not disappear with it. At first, the idea did not immediately take off, not because it was dismissed outright, but because aviation authorities were cautious. Airlines questioned cost, practicality, and necessity, and early technology limited what was possible. So the invention sat in a strange space, known, tested, but not yet required. But ideas like this don't vanish. They accumulate importance over time. By the 1960s and the 1970s, aviation regulators overseas began to recognize its value, and cockpit voice recorders and flight data recorders slowly became standard practice, and eventually forming what we know now as the black box system. Today, every commercial aircraft carries both a flight data recorder and a cockpit voice recorder, systems that allow investigators to reconstruct not just what failed, but how and why. But despite the global impact, Warren did not become wealthy from his invention. It was developed in a government research environment without commercial ownership or personal royalties tied to its worldwide adoption. Recognition came later in life, including the Officer of the Order of Australia, also known as the AO. But by then, his system had already been saving lives for decades. Dr. David Warren died in 2010 at the age of 85. From a remote island in Northern Territory to every aircraft in the sky today, he didn't just create a device that records flight. He gave aviation its memory and the world its ability to speak after silence.
In the unlikely event that an aircraft goes down, search and rescue teams will be sent out to look for wreckage in something known as the black box. Well, it turns out that the black box is actually orange, and what you're seeing me do here is test the battery of the black box. This allows the device to send out a signal or a chirp that search and rescue teams are looking for, and this is what the chirp sounds like.